Hey, Graphic Design 2. We're going to talk about how to add texture to your stained glass project. So by now, you should have your line work completed in an Illustrator file. So what we're going to do is we're just going to open that Illustrator file in Photoshop. So you're going to go and open your Photoshop software, and then you're going to do File, Open, and you're going to open something from your computer. And you're going to find where you have that Illustrator file saved. And then all you're going to do is find the file that's your line work that's an Illustrator document. And you're going to open that guy up. So Photoshop's going to be like, hey, this is not a Photoshop file. And you're going to be like, yes, I know. And we're going to change a couple of things. So the pixels per inch need to be 300. So that way the quality of our finished image is high enough where we could print it if we want to. And the mode needs to be RGB color. So that way we can, not lab color, RGB color. So that way we can adjust the pictures as needed to be the texture for our stained glass. So from there, you're just going to press OK. And then you're automatically going to get something that will look like this. If yours is transparent instead of having a white background, then you're going to find your layers panel and you're going to click on those 4 little lines on the top of your layers panel right here. And you're going to flatten your image. So that way it will be a white background instead of having any transparent situations. So after you flatten your image, the next step is going to be to turn it into a workable layer instead of being a background layer. So we can do that by double clicking on the layer that's currently labeled as background. And then we're going to title that line work, because that is what this is. And we're going to say OK. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to make the blend mode multiply. So if we click on this drop-down menu that says normal, we're going to make it multiply. So what that does is Photoshop will show you a white background, but you'll be able to work underneath it because it's essentially making everything that's white transparent. So this is just easier on the eyes when you're working rather than having those squares that are showing that it's transparent. This white background is just a lot easier to look at when you're working. And this particular project is really repetitive, so I don't want you to have eye strain. Okay, so once we have our line work where the blend mode is multiply and it has a white background, then we're going to lock it. So we're going to press that little lock button so that way we don't mess up anything that's on that layer. Okay, so the next step is going to be to make a selection. So we're going to use our magic wand tool, which is a tool that we've used in the past. But when we've used it in the past, we haven't been very concerned with what the edges look like. And so we're going to talk about that today. So once I click with my magic wand in one of those white areas of the line work, when I zoom in, you can see all these little pixels, and you can see that some of them are gray and some of them are black, right? So these little like gray pixels that exist here are there so that in Photoshop, when somebody's looking at a line, the line looks more rounded. It looks more soft. It doesn't have like those pixelated edges. So that's good for something that we don't need to fill. But when we put a texture behind this, we don't want to have a gray or a white outline around that texture. So we're going to need to expand that selection. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go up to select and then modify and expand. And we're just going to expand it by 1 pixel. So you can leave that as the number 1. We're going to say OK. And then if I zoom in here, you'll notice that those little marching ants went backwards a little bit. So when we insert a selection of a texture, it's going to be bigger than the selection that we want with the outline. So that way, when we put it underneath our line work, it won't have any white space because there'll be overlap. The black line and the texture will overlap each other. So we're going to go ahead and leave that the way it is for now. And then I already found some texture images. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open some of the texture images here. So if I just open all of these, I'll show you guys a couple of different ways that we can make this texture. Okay, so let's say, for example, we wanted to use these leaves as our texture. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna go up to filter, blur, and then we can try a motion blur. And if we drag this guy to make it super blurry, that would be one option. So from here, I'm just gonna press OK. And then I can choose a section of this that I think looks cool. So I'm going to go with my rectangular marquee tool, and I'm going to just select part of this, and then I'm going to copy it. So you could do edit copy, but I like hotkeys. So I'm going to do Control C to copy this, and then I'm going to find the document that I was working in, and I'm going to paste this, but I'm not going to paste it like regular. I need to paste it where it goes inside of the selection that I've made. So I'm going to do edit, paste special, and then paste into. And then if you notice right there, there's the hotkeys for how to paste into. So it's Alt, Shift, Control, V. So next time that I do this, I'm not going to do all of this nonsense with clicking on the drop-down menu. I'm just going to use the hotkey. But I'm going to go ahead and press this for now. And then you'll notice that it automatically gets a mask, and that mask is not linked. That space that's in between the mask and the image is blank. And that's not how we've used it before, but it's okay for this because I want to be able to move this around wherever I want it to go. Okay, so the mask stays where it is, and the picture can be moved because they are not linked. So now I can go ahead and do Control T to transform, and I can resize this bad boy so that it fits in there. And then it looks pretty cool. I sort of like that color, but let's say that I wanted that ray that's coming out from my character's head. Let's say that I wanted that to be a different color. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my adjustment layers, and I'm going to find hue and saturation. I'm going to make sure that it's clipped to the picture that I want to edit. So I'm going to press this button so it's clipped to the layer that has the texture. And then I can just change the hue. So maybe I want it to be like more yellow. Let's see, or maybe more orange. Orange sounds cool. You can make the saturation go higher. And then fancy that, you got something that kind of looks like glass, right? So then the next step would be to just drag both the hue and saturation and the picture that's hooked to it underneath the line work, right? So now I've got that picture and the adjustment layer together under the line work. And if I zoom in really close, there's no weird haze around it, right? Because it's overlapping. So if I turn this line work off, you can see that it kind of overlaps that picture, which is perfect. That's exactly what I want, right? So now I'm going to repeat that process again. But I don't want to have to go up to the top and click to expand my selection each time. So I'm actually going to make an action key. So we're going to go ahead and go to Window and find Actions, which will create a little play button right underneath your history button. And so with actions, what I'm going to be doing is creating a hotkey that is my own action that I want it to be, right? So for this particular instance, that action would be going up to select and expanding my selection. I'm going to go to the selection tool. I'm going to select that white area. And then now I'm going to start a new recording of an action. So I'm going to go ahead and press this plus sign so I can make a new action. I'm going to title it Expand Selection. And I'm going to make the function key F2. But F2 already has a function attached to it. So all I'm going to do is select Shift. So that way I'll have to do Shift F2 and it should work, right? So I'm going to go ahead and press record. And then now I can go up to select, modify, expand by 1 pixel, press OK, and then stop the recording. So now, if I make a different selection, now all I have to do is Shift F2, and it's going to automatically do that selection for me. So now, if I look in my history, it doesn't make a big difference, right? Like from zoomed out, but you can see it did it for me, right? So now I can come over here and maybe I can make a different texture out of one of these pictures. So let's go with ground beef, right? So the ground beef here, I'm going to go ahead and do filter, blur. Maybe we want to do a radial blur. We can change it to zoom here. We can make the amount larger and then say okay. And then maybe in addition to a blur, we could also do filter and distort. And then maybe we also do a twirl. We can make that twirl really dramatic. And say okay. And then maybe also we want it to be a little bit less harsh on the edges. So maybe we do another filter of blur and then Gaussian blur. And then now we have this really cool texture here that again, I'm just gonna select. And then I'm gonna do Control C to copy. I'm gonna go back to my image. And I'm gonna do the hotkey for pasting in place, which is Control Alt Shift V. And then now I've got that texture inside of my selection. And I can do Control T and scoot it around. Press enter after you make it the size that you want, and then just drag it underneath your line work. And again, I can add an adjustment layer. So I can change the colors. It should be clipped. And then maybe I want this one to be like purple. Maybe it also wants to be more saturated. Beautiful. So now I'm getting these cool textures here, and you can make texture out of anything, right? You can make texture out of rocks, ground beef you just saw, fur, I don't know, anything that you can think of that has a lot of detail. So really the possibilities are endless for making the different textures. You can use any of these filters. I think that the blur filters and the distort filters are probably the best, but you can go through and click on any of these drop-down filters here and change the texture to whatever you think looks cool. So keep in mind how many different spaces you have, and then also the colors that you want to use, and potentially using the same image over multiple spaces. So for example, if I had done this guy in both spaces, it would be a little bit more like stained glass because maybe I would have cut them at the same time. So to show you what that would be like let's say I want this little space and this little space to be the same color. I would go with my magic wand, click on that space, hold shift, and click on the next one. And then now I need to expand that selection. So I'm going to do Shift F2, and that automatically expands my selection. And then I can go and find the texture that I want. So maybe this time I want to do that little section. And then again, we're going to do Control C to copy, Control Alt Shift V to paste, and then Control T to make it smaller if I want to. You could also stretch it by holding shift and stretching it this way. But now I've got two different selections, like two different areas with the same picture. So you don't have to use one picture per area. So if I go back to my layers over here, I got to drag that picture underneath. And then I can add another hue and saturation level. So you can see that this is going to get a little bit tedious as far as how many layers you have. So if you want your layers to stay organized, I highly recommend working in sections. So let's say that I only did this section here that was the spaceship with all of the rays coming out from it. Then I could select all of the layers that have to do with that section, and I could group them together. So I could select everything and press this little group folder button and then label that folder spaceship. And so that way, if I need to go back and find something to edit it later, it's all organized in files instead of having just a mess of layers over there. So to recap, you can use any picture to create texture. Don't forget about hue and saturation adjustments and hotkeys. So good luck. I'm excited to see how they turn out.